Welcome to Kingdomize, the podcast, where we discuss how to see our lives and our world through a kingdom lens, how to infuse kingdom culture into our families, our workplaces, and our cities, as we all participate in the dream of Jesus to see his kingdom on earth as it is in heaven.
Guys, it's so good to be with you today. This is the Kingdomize Global podcast. We are excited about what we're sharing with you. We're talking about transforming communities, transforming cities. And today I have a practitioner with me that have actually been engaged in this area for numbers of years, Dr. Brian Beatty. He's actually even written a book on the subject, The City of God, worth getting. But today we welcome Brian to the podcast. And today we are going to see part 2, community transformation, and what you have to do individually for this to take place in your city. Brian, you're welcome. Good to see you again. Looking forward to hearing what you're sharing.
Ian, we have such good times together. It's great. Thanks for hanging out today. And I'm just going to jump right into it because people get me talking about this and I can't stop. So I'm going to jump in so I have all of the 30 minutes. How's that? So last time we talked about dreaming. So as we shared last week, we've created a bit of a how-to, 10 steps for transforming your community, transforming your city. And so last week we talked about dreaming, is that we tell stories a lot at Kingdomize because we want to inspire people. We want to inspire them not to go, hey, that Ian Green's awesome, or Brian, he's amazing, or look what they did in the harbor in Indonesia. Like, we tell those stories to go, they did it, you can do it. So we want people to hear stories and then dream and believe for their community and then ask God to dream his dreams. But then the next step is what we're talking about today. The next step is about embracing personal renewal. Because after you get inspired and, oh, this is great, I'm dreaming, then it affects everything about you. and we use a phrase over and over again, and we'll probably say it a bunch of times today, that it's transform people that transform cities. Transform people. And so that transformation personally, that is, we're just recommending you should embrace that now. Because the idea of being a transformer, a reformer, a kingdomizer, it changes everything about you, who you are, how you think, how you act. Everything changes. So we're just really encouraging you to grab onto and embrace personal renewal. It starts now. It doesn't stop. When you get to heaven, you can stop changing. Boom, in the twinkling of an eye, you're like Jesus. Until then, we keep changing.
You know, Brian, I mean, I'm sure people listen to this. It feels such a huge thing, right, to transform a city. But there are bite-sized bits that we take in terms of you've had to be committed to some level of personal transformation. And what were the kind of stages that you went through? Because I remember you, right? We've known each other a long time. I remember you when you were, in inverted commas, a pastor in a traditional type of Canadian church. You've gone through a whole metamorphosis of your thinking. I mean, I think it would be interesting for the listeners to know what happened. How did you move from there to how you got this kind of thinking now? What was your personal transformation in all of this process?
Yeah, that's really important. And so just to let everyone know, as we're leaning into this, is today we'll talk about the personal transformation. Who am I? And then we'll talk about how I think. Then we'll talk about what I do. So back to what you said, and I've shared this in a few of our podcasts before, but I think it's really important for people to understand where this started. And I wasn't a city guy. I wasn't raised in a city. I didn't particularly like cities. When God called me to city transformation, I was in the largest city in Canada. Didn't want to be there. I was a bit complaining. I was in complain mode. God, get me out of here. And it was at that time, it was specifically October of 1995 when God called me to city transformation. And that was through the process. I'll share it again here. Is I was praying. Actually, some people were praying with me and God gave me an open vision of His heart for cities, and what I saw was I was walking up. I could tell I was walking up to a cliff. I could see what would be below it. That there was a man sitting on a rock, looking down at something below this cliff. And as I got closer, I could see it was a city. And I looked over. It was a guy sitting there in a golf shirt with a collar and shorter hair. And I'm like, but I knew it was Jesus. So I don't know why he was like that. But anyway, I knew it was Jesus. And I looked at him and he was weeping. And I heard in my heart that Jesus still weeps over the cities, which went back to the phrase when Jesus comes to Jerusalem, they don't accept him and he weeps over it. And I heard in my heart, Jesus still weeps over the city. And then Jesus took me through a number of things that were happening below in the city. He'd point out something and say this. He'd point out something and say this. He'd say, and it was a calling. He was saying, will you come and work with me on city transformation? And so I'm a pastor. I'm a guy that loves Jesus. And I'm a bit driven. So I'm like, I get up and I'm like, yeah, Jesus, let's do this. And his immediate response to me was, you can't do it because you love the idea more than you love the people. You love the idea of transformation more than you love the people. And it's not like we weren't bad people, my wife and I, and we weren't bad people. We were pastors. We loved people. But Jesus was right, not like he's ever wrong. But Jesus was right that I'm very functionally driven.
I would say, Brian, for lots of A+1 type leaders, right? Goal orientated, vision orientated, we can love the process more than we love the people that we're trying to help, right? So that must have been a fairly shocking revelation to you as the Lord communicated that to you.
Well, Jesus and I were on, for the most part, good speaking terms, and and he loved to, and I had given him permission to speak however you want, and so, but this was the first time. I'll be honest. This was the first time it was really that specific, and I thought, and I couldn't argue it. Right? It's not like when Jesus speaks. In general, you can't speak, but I know my makeup, and I knew that was true. So, but that began the process of that personal transformation, right? You've got to love the people. You've got to love what Jesus loves, right? And so the process that began for us was, and we'll talk about this near the end of today, but for me, what we call I hear God and obey. So build a relationship with Jesus, make it personal, and do it in such a way that he's got a plan for the planet and he wants us to take part in it. And so we need to hear God. We need to obey. We need to walk in step with the Spirit. And so that affects everything about us, right? It affects, and for us, we would say where it starts is how we see God, how we see ourselves. Those two foundational pieces everything else can be built on that. So Is God a good God? Is he who he says he is? And are we who he says we are? So those two pieces are really, really significant in the whole process, right?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, and again, sometimes leaders, and maybe you listen to this right now, sometimes we struggle with that. We actually struggle with the image of God, and we sometimes struggle with our own self-image. And for some of us who were driven, it was a self-image issue, not a God image issue. And that has to come to the cross. And this is where this whole process of personal transformation really bites. It gets right inside of us. It's not just a new theory. It's not just a technicality. It's not just a new game plan that's come out of the box. It actually is going to affect every area of our lives. And I know, Brian, because of our relationship, I mean, there became a huge philosophical change anyway, in terms of how you did life, how you did church, what you saw the outcomes look like. Like, explain a little bit about that.
Yeah, after we went from who I am, which never quits, by the way. All this stuff we're talking about today, it's never done, right? But after I got there, I realized that how I think is really important. What what I think about again, what I think about God and what I think about myself as foundational. But then what I think about my calling. Uh, in fact, I would say almost everything that I had learned up to that point changed because I would say through Bible college, I would have kind of maybe defined myself as maybe a revivalist. So back in Bible college, my favorite course was revivals. Could it happen again? The revival. But I would say what's more important than revival, and revival is important. Like if a church is dead and not awake and needs to be awakened, then man, you need a revival. But what our cities need is reformation. So I would
Right.
say God's looking for people that are understanding reformation. What does it mean to get the kingdom of God in all the mountains, all the spheres of influence in our cities? And what the dialogue we have, Ian, is the difference between is it church centric or kingdom centric, right? Is it church centric or kingdom centric? And that's the connection between Mark 16, right, where Jesus calls individuals. So I've shared this before in many different places, but Lorne Cunningham calls it the Great Commission is for the everys and the alls, right? It's every creature in all nations. So Mark 16 is the every creature, every individual. Matthew 28 is the all nations. And it's both that Jesus wants a family. He wants individuals. He wants a family. But then the all nations is he wants his government, his kingdom on earth as it is in heaven.
Yeah, I think for quite a number of years, I saw Mark 16 and Matthew 28 as the same level of data because I wasn't given attention, right? Wasn't given attention to the detail as you just clearly explained to us. And so I think as a result of that, a lot of people maybe even listening to this podcast now, you just think it's about evangelism. You just think it's about revival, where God has a greater plan. He wants reformation. And so I mean, that phrase that you've just used, Brian, kingdom centric versus church centric, that's quite challenging, particularly for us church people that have led church or been a part of leadership in church. Because I would say for many, many years, I would say, the church, the kingdom is all God, it's all good, it's all the same thing, not fully realizing that the church is the conduit for which the kingdom flows through. And they have two different and separate functions. But I think the philosophical change and probably theological change that you went through, would that be correct? That was monumental to you in terms of spinning you right round 180 degrees.
Yeah, 100%. Everything you just said is 100% what I went through. And I would say our traditional teaching, it wasn't bad. It's what people understood. It's what brought them to where they were at the time. But it was, again, I think, as you just said, the church and the kingdom were synonymous. But we would understand that as a reformer, thinking as a reformer, that church is part of the kingdom. So, we would go into teaching like the seven mountains. We would say the spheres of influence. So it's arts and entertainment, it's business, it is the church, it is education, family, government, and media, and more. But all these major spheres, they're all mountains in the mountain range of the kingdom.
Yeah.
And I mean, when I heard that in the after the vision in '95, and then I'm starting to hear this teaching, I'm going, wow, I don't remember hearing that anywhere else. But then I looked into it and says, well, this has got to be right. There's no way God wants us to leave all those areas for the atheists and the communists and the other ists to take over the world while we sit in our church and worship, right, and sing kumbaya, right?
No, that's awesome, Brian. I mean, I would say, knowing you like that took levels of courage, right? That took levels of courage to make that change. I mean, how did your friends, how did some of your pastor friends respond to you as you basically go, you know, guys, there's something more that we've not seen and we've missed this, and this is what I'm seeing. Like, what kind of dialogue did you have, or any pushback did you have from some of your friends?
Well, I think then and even now, I don't think most people are on this. They're not on this journey yet. I think it is the transition that's happening in the church, in the world, in Christendom, if you want to use that. I think it's a transition. I think it's the next. It's the wave that God's on right now. That the Reformation. I think 500 after the last Reformation was about, the just will live by faith. Great. So we got Mark 16. For 500 years, we got Mark 16. The individual part, the everys. I think
Yep.
now God's all about the priest of all believers. It's about the discipling nations, and so some are on. Like, I mean, just reconnecting with you, 10, 15 years ago in a conference about these kind of things. That's
Mhm.
huge, right?
Yeah.
Some people are getting it, some people aren't. I would say most of my friends uh, can appreciate what I'm doing. Like, I would say they look at what happened in our city and go, well, I can't discredit that.
Right.
But I wouldn't say the majority of churches are on board with, oh, I guess I need to do that now. But I do see it's what God's doing.
No, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, yeah, I would say there is an awakening going on in the body of Christ at the moment, where, a phrase I've kind of heard you use before was, we were just preaching a gospel of salvation, not the gospel of the kingdom. It probably would be good if you could unpack that a little bit, because it's such a great phrase and it kind of synthesizes the philosophical transformation that you went through. Yeah, can you do that for us?
No, that's really good. I'm glad to ask that. So I would say that Mark 16, again, it's the every creature preached that part where Mark uh, displays what Jesus said in the Great Commission, that is for every creature. And so we would say that's the gospel of salvation. We want people to get saved. We would never say we don't want people saved. People need the Lord. Great, we got it. So we don't want that to ever stop. So that's Mark 16, every creature. That would take us back in history to Genesis 3. So we're solving the fall of man problem. So now we need Jesus. Genesis 3, they fall. Now God's going to pick us up again. So that's the rescue part. But the gospel of the kingdom, Matthew 28. So now we're going to disciple nations. We're going to disciple cities. We're going to change systems that are affecting people. So if people aren't living thriving lives, if they don't have righteousness, peace, and joy, then the kingdom hasn't come yet. And so we want to bring the kingdom, the gospel of the kingdom, the full kingdom. And we would suggest that goes back to Genesis 1, where God said, come on, let's work together and bring my kingdom. That was where he established the idea to Adam and Eve. And yes, they fell. And yes, we want to pick them up with the fall, the sin piece, but it's even more important. Yes, we've been rescued. Now we're recruited to bring his kingdom, right? That dominion, like not in a negative way, not in a overbearing way, but a kingdom of love, joy, peace, right? And so that gospel of salvation is contained in the gospel of the kingdom that we want to live.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard some people explain it a little bit like this. Is you go to a hotel, you check in, you're in the foyer, you're in the hotel. So that's the gospel of salvation. But in that hotel, there are restaurants. There's a jacuzzi, there's a spa, there's rooms, there's suites and wherever. And I think understanding that the gospel of the kingdom is to penetrate every single area of society is an eye opener. And I know for me that was quite transformational too. Now, okay, you got that right. You got that. And then you decided to start a community of faith with that kind of thinking? What happened?
Yeah, so we understand that this idea of community transformation affects us. Who am I? It affects how I think, mindsets, paradigms, always shifting. We want to grab onto that reformer kind of thinking as well, kingdom-centric thinking. But then to practically live it out means the way you do church, becomes different. So
Yeah.
when we planted our church in our city, we called it Freedom House, but then for a tagline so people could understand, we said we're a community center where church happens. We're a ministry center where church happens. So we wanted to say, and I understand that church doesn't mean a place. I get that. But the people outside don't know what ecclesia is, so I can't say that. We're the ecclesia. Got it. But we are. So we're a ministry center, a community center where church happens. So we have all kinds of questions through the years, like, do you guys have a church? Because we're out in the community so much, right? We've been asked many, many times, do you have a church? Yeah, we have a nice building, blah, 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 blah. But we intentionally said, we are going to change the city. Not just us, but we're going to take these reformer kind of thoughts, these kingdom-centric thoughts, and we're going to put them into practice with others that believe that. And I'll tell you, I didn't learn this at Bible college. Like, I mean, it's sad, but I learned how to run a good church at Bible college. It was great. I'm thankful, but there's so many things that phrase I just said. In fact, I have a sermon called "I Didn't Take This at Bible College" because of the amount of things that we learned. And it started, Ian. You know the story. It started with, so we bought an old bar in the downtown of our city, and it was running at as a bar up until we got it. So, Friday nights and Saturday night, it's a bar still. Sunday, we get the building, we do church there. Monday, we're renovating our church now, which was a bar. And as we're in there renovating, there's a knock on the front door of the church. I open the door and I get propositioned, one of the ladies of the night, I get propositioned on the front door of my church. And I turned back and I said to one of the guys, I said, I didn't take this at Bible college. So that's where the phrase started. And I'll tell you, since that day, 20, 25 years ago, I have said that phrase a lot.
No doubt about it. No doubt about it. So you did that. That resulted of personal transformation, recalibrating who you were, understanding the function of the church and the function of the kingdom. I mean, there was probably some pivotal points in there in terms of, okay, how do I now integrate this new information into my lifestyle, into my daily activity, into my ministry philosophy? Like what were the things, what were the building blocks for that, Brian?
Yeah, so I think this goes back to the kingdom-centric thing. So not church-centric, back to kingdom-centric thinking. So what do I believe about the church? So I mentioned in jest on the way by the word ecclesia, but that's important that when Jesus said he would build his church, it was never about a building. He could have said, I build my synagogue, I build my temple. He didn't say that. He said, I build the ecclesia. And that was people. It was always about people. So you look at what he meant by that. So I had to change. What does it mean about, what do I believe about the church? What do I believe about the city? Right? So traditional church is you put on good stuff and you invite people to your building. Well, I didn't see that as the model of church that was necessary. Maybe in our culture, Canada, maybe 40s, 50s, 60s, it was okay to do that. The average bear was going to church, and you could get them there and teach them. But it's exactly the opposite now. Most people they're staying away in droves, really, right? And so we have to get creative. We have to be, and I don't think it's just creative. I think Jesus did his best work outside of the synagogue, to be honest. So I don't think it's something new. So we did that, and I would add, the one thing I would add to that is that I think the thing that was really important is that I had to understand at the time as a pastor, although we were very involved with business and government, I had to come to a realization that my calling, although it was important and sacred, was no more important and sacred than the calling to government or the calling to business. And it wasn't even important enough for me to grab a few of the churches that believe for city transformation. Yeah, we needed churches, but now we need people. We need people in business and government and education and all these other spheres, all the other mountains. And if you want to have city transformation that works for everyone, we've got to have that integrated approach. And that's probably one of the biggest things as far as what we do, what transformers do, is understanding, yep, you're called to, and I need you for the purpose of transformation. We need each other.
Yeah, absolutely right. Absolutely right. It's everybody in the party, right? It's not just, I was kind of brought up with the thinking that, the elders of the city were the pastors, right? But I began to understand there are other elders in the city, and they don't have an ecclesiastical calling. They have a business calling or they have a political calling, but they also are gatekeepers to the city, and that was a bit of a change for me. I think one of the other things I think I've heard you say in the past was moving out from program based thinking to being a little more raw, being a little more sensitive to the Holy Spirit. I think the language maybe you would use is you ought to learn how to hear and obey God. Hear and obey God.
Right.
And I mean that when you're the primary leader, that's what you're supposed to do, right? But oftentimes we're too busy to do that. But I know for you, it became a fundamental building block in terms of what is God saying? Now, what do we do? Like what are the outworking of some of that, Brian?
Yeah, no, that's really good. So going back to the vision in 95, God spoke to us about cities. Part of the idea of the changing of thinking, changing of the personality was that phrase you just used about hearing God and obeying. So we looked at different styles of leadership, like you just said. So we would say there's program-driven churches, and that's okay. There's purpose-driven churches, and that was a big thing. But we felt like the presence-driven church was a way to go. After all, we think it's Jesus' church. So the idea of hear God and obey, that phrase, that lifestyle, it's because we wanted to be a presence-driven church. So there needs to be programs and there needs to be purpose, but I think it needs to start with presence. And so that actually came for us out of when we were first, before we actually opened the church, we were renovating the church, and we would meet Thursday nights just to get together and worship and pray. And I felt like God asked me to take the church through the book of Joshua. And this came out of Joshua chapter 1. Joshua 1:1, it says, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now, Joshua, I want you to go lead. So God said to Joshua, and I just felt like saying, well, why did God say to Joshua? Well, because he said, and then if you actually go through the book of Joshua, it's at least every chapter that God and Joshua are having this chat. It seemed like that was important. And if you go back to almost anyone in Scripture, it seems like they're having a chat with God. It seems important. And so that presence-driven thing, and so that other piece there was out of Joshua 1 was, he said in verse 7, if you're careful to listen and obey, I'll make you prosperous and successful. And I'm like, well, I want to be prosperous and successful. I don't want to be a numpty. So well, there seemed to be a conditional promise there, right? If you do this, I will do this. And by the way, I would suggest that all of God's promises are conditional, except that he's going to love everyone. That's unconditional. Every other promise of God is conditional. I will do this if you do this. And so for this hear God and obey thing is, if you're careful to listen and obey, I want to make you prosperous and successful. And so that's how we lived our life. So when we make choices personally or on behalf of the church, we did it that way. We did it that way.
I mean, I love that, Brian. Again, I just admire your courage in doing that. And for those that are listening, it will take courage. It will take courage. We have what we have because we've done what we've done. But if we want something different, then we need to move in a different direction. And of course, Brian's explaining how the philosophical and theological change that he had with that. But in the end, you can hear God, but to obey him, they're two separate things, right? And it just takes some level of courage to do that. And
that's probably why God said to Joshua 3 times, "Be strong and courageous," right? In that same context, like you're gonna love this. You're gonna go take over the land, but trust me, the giants you saw a few months ago, Joshua, they're still there. You're gonna have to be strong and courageous for sure.
That's good. So, Brian, we're just coming to the end of this podcast. As a conclusion, as a wrap up, what are your final thoughts to help the people that are listening today?
Yeah. So I would just encourage all of us to remember that it's transformed people that transform cities. This idea of transformed cities is kind of a great dream, but it has to come out of transformed people. That we live differently, we think differently, we act differently, because now we want to be part of what God's doing on the earth, bringing his kingdom on the earth as it is in heaven. And so it's ongoing. It doesn't end. We always say, Ian, it's a marathon, not a sprint. I know in church we like to come to the altar and get something in a few minutes. It's like, well, there's somebody's going to preach. We're going to come to the altar and I'm going to hold my hands up and, oh, I got it. Well, that's not what this is. That's not what this is. This is I'm going to make a decision that's going to last through my lifetime and then my kids and their kids. And I'm hoping it goes for another few hundred years until Jesus comes. Right. So that's what we're building. We're actually transforming. We're reforming cities. So I would just say, man, embrace this. Like, embrace the personal renewal. Embrace God's heart. Embrace his mind, his actions. And maybe even today, like, ask yourself, well, in order for me to do this, what needs to change? What am I thinking that needs to change? What am I doing that needs to change? What am I spending time on right now that's not bringing the kingdom, but it's a program that I've been doing for years? So, yeah, I would just get honest and look at it. If you've actually been dreaming about community transformation, just get honest with your life, get honest with your time and say, God, this is where I'm going. I'm going with you. I want to be transformed.
This is fantastic, Brian. I absolutely, I've loved this podcast. I think because I know you, I know the authenticity of what you're sharing, the truth of what you're sharing, the steps that you've taken, the courageous steps, and the amazing outcomes in the city that you were called to transform, which is still in a place of transformation even today. And it as Brian says, it never comes to an end. And God's transformation, that never comes to an end. And I hope you've really enjoyed this. I hope you've been inspired. We talked about the dream last time. This is about how to embrace personal transformation because it's transformed people, transformed cities. Thank you. Thank you for joining the Kingdomize Global podcast today. We trust that you were blessed, you were encouraged, more that you were challenged, and you can decide to do something before the day is out. God bless you.
Thanks for joining us today on Kingdomize the podcast. Let's keep the discussion going throughout the week on our socials or on our website, kingdomizglobal.com. Contact us today to see how we can walk together to see more of God's kingdom in your city as it is in heaven.